We're joined now by Morgan Carroll, who's the Democratic candidate for the 6th Congressional District, occupied by Republican Congressman Mike Coffman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We have a big debate coming up in the race later this week, and now we have an opportunity to kind of explore your views ahead of time. So Congressman Coffman is asked about Donald Trump a lot. You are asked about Hillary Clinton less so. So let's explore that. Do you think that Hillary Clinton is trustworthy?
Yeah, I think when she's taking up issues about the middle class, about whether she's going to fight for education, for human rights, for civil rights, be able to make sound decisions with good information and advisors on national security, I trust she's going to be making the best decisions she can for all of us with good information, and that she's going to use due diligence to get the information she needs to make a good decision.
So that sounds like decision-making and leadership, but I'm curious whether you think that she's trustworthy.
I think she's trustworthy to be out there fighting for the things that matter to us, which is to make sure that we are growing a middle class, that we're looking out for kids, for families, to make sure that we're actually expanding rather than shrinking opportunities. So when I'm looking at what I'm trusting in someone, I need to know I can trust that they're going to be fighting for the things that are important to me and my community, and I think she'll do that.
In one of Hillary Clinton's recent leaked speeches, she talked to a group about the need to have private positions, which are different than the public positions that you talk about with voters. And some political analysts will say, well, that's commonplace. That's how deals get done. Do you have private positions on issues that voters don't know about that are different than your public positions?
For me, what you see is what you get. So I think people have a right to know what you think and where you stand. And people are going to be addressing a lot of different issues. But I think at the end of the day, the most transparent thing you can do is just be true to who you are, tell people where you're at, and let the cards fall where they do.
Is it troubling to you that if you're elected and if Hillary Clinton is elected president, that you would be dealing with a president who has that philosophy about having a public position than a private position?
I prefer to deal with people in any stripe, legislative, executive, or anyone else, where I know that what I see is what I get. For me, I prefer to do negotiations with people where anything they're telling me is exactly where they are. It's just easier and more straightforward that way.
What did you think about the bit that came out? This was another one of Hillary Clinton's leaked speeches. In a speech to Brazilian bankers, she talked about her dream of hemispheric open trade and open borders. Is that a goal that you share?
For me, fair trade is most important. And I say that because if we're going to make sure that we're protecting American jobs and American wages and safe working conditions and environmental conditions, I think we need expansive trade. I think we need to be promoting trade. But for me, when I'm looking at the trade deals we're doing, I'm fundamentally looking at how is that going to impact American workers and American jobs.
If you were voting on TPP, where would you be on that?
I oppose the TPP.
Okay. This has been a big headline lately. What do you think of what Hillary Clinton said, calling Donald Trump supporters deplorable?
I don't think you ever attack voters. Look, people are allowed to have whatever opinions they do. There's a lot of mixture of opinions out there. I think the real issue and the real critique is against Donald Trump himself. I think the positions he has taken have been deplorable. I think Donald Trump's mocking veterans is deplorable. I think him calling women fat pigs and slobs is deplorable. I think him mocking about openly sexually predating on women and getting away with it is deplorable. I think calling immigrants rapists and criminals is deplorable. But the onus of the most unacceptable behavior and comments we've seen really need to lay with Donald Trump, and you just don't attack the voters for who they are.
Has Congressman Coffman done or said anything that you find to be deplorable?
I think there's a combination of both some things said and done. Out of the things he said that are most concerning to me, it's, for example, when he was Secretary of State telling new immigrants that if they didn't like losing Spanish access to ballots, that they ought to just get a dictionary. I think that's a deplorable thing to say to people, especially people who are citizens with a constitutional right to vote. But I think perhaps the most deplorable actions or the most difficult actions really come in a series of votes, like willfully choosing not to fund the VA when we know we have a wait list on medical services or on disability processing claims or on when student debt was up and the Democrats had a bipartisan deal for a little while to get it reduced from 7% to 3.4%, it expired. And so by voting to refuse continuation of a lowered interest rate, that's a vote that knowingly made college more expensive for people. Or voting to cut Pell Grants hurts students and makes college less affordable. Or voting to cut early childhood education. You know, I'm not sure I'd use the word deplorable, but what I would say is that those are votes that I think are very hurtful to people in the district, and he's certainly entitled to have those positions and to cast those votes, but those are disturbing votes, I'll say. When you look at the needs of the people in our community compared with the vote he's cast, those are very troubling votes to me.
It strikes me that the longtime criticism of Congressman Coffman is that he is too conservative for the district. But he has said that he's changed a number of his views over the years to better fit the district. So it seems to me like the attack is actually on his character, that he's being dishonest about what he truly believes. Do you believe the congressman's been dishonest?
I think to this day it is extremely difficult for anyone to know where Mike Coffman stands on anything. And that's not just an old Mike Coffman or a new Mike Coffman. But he says one thing in Colorado, says something else in D.C. He'll say something even within one short period of time, and if it's a different audience on a different topic, he'll say something else. And so the one thing that's been very consistent about Mike Coffman over his time is Mike Coffman will do or say anything that is helpful to Mike Coffman in office. So when you want to try and predict, back to the issue of having a public position or a private position, it has always been extremely difficult to know where Mike Coffman's going to come down on an issue, because the one thing that has remained consistent is he will do or say what he's a very politically astute operative, right? And he knows he will do or say what he thinks needs to be said or done to hold his seat. That can make it very difficult to know what he's actually going to do when he's in D.C. And so we've seen one kind of rhetoric when he's out in the community in the 6th Congressional District, and often votes in D.C. were, for example, on the bipartisan transportation bill, it's one of the only bipartisan things that Congress managed to actually accomplish. And Mike Coffman voted against it with a very small number of very fringe, far-right folks, and then comes back and he's like, oh, hey, I'm like this moderate. And so one of the few bipartisan opportunities we had to create jobs and to actually improve Colorado's transportation system, he chose to align himself when he was in D.C. with the fringe of the far right. And so those are hard to line up in his case.
But dishonest?
I will just say unpredictable. I don't want to say why he does what he does, but I will say that his actions and his words do not often line up.
We skipped over part of what Hillary Clinton told those Brazilian bankers, because we talked about trade and we talked about fair trade. The other thing that Hillary Clinton said in that speech, in the speech to the Brazilian bankers, Hillary Clinton talked about her dream of open trade and open borders. Is open borders a dream that you share along with her?
Well, I don't think any nation state truly, literally has open borders, and I don't think you can for national security reasons. I do think the way I would view that is, look, I'm not an isolationist. I think for the most part we're in an international community and we should be facilitating as many international relationships as possible. I wouldn't personally take that literally to mean open borders in some sense of free-flowing. But I think as long as you have the national security protocols for what's there, whether it's through trade, through education exchange programs, we benefit from that.
You don't take her literally when she says
I mean, for me, I wouldn't take that literally, because literally my answer would be no. I mean, I don't think we're all talking about absolutely free open borders. I would say as a separate note that if we're speaking of borders, that I do think we have a broken immigration system, and I don't think anyone's solution on immigration is free, wide open borders. That's just not responsible for national security.
With some specificity, what would be the path to citizenship or legal status for the people living illegally in the 6th?
So I think that that looks like a couple things. I support a policy that has been known as both DACA and DAPA. And when we've been looking at comprehensive immigration reform, what that means is giving people a pathway while they're already in the United States and part of our community with their families here, so that they do not have to leave the country, be further separated from their family, and start a multi-year long wait list in order to come back in and have a pathway to citizenship. So for me,
No return, no touchback process here.
right. I mean, that's arbitrary.
Open to whom? All?
Well, so for example, for people who are in the 6th Congressional District, if you are in this community and you are part of the fabric of our society and you have family here, we need to start with the people who are already here, who are already part of our communities. And I think something a lot of folks don't necessarily realize until you spend time talking to the people in the district is how much of a reality mixed status families really are. We start with this very artificial idea of people are either all here lawfully and have been here a long time, or in some variation of immigration status. Well, in the 6th District, you have people who are, their families within the same family, who may be here on visa, who may be on refugee status, somebody who was brought here as a child in an undocumented way but has a parent that has become a citizen. It is a very complicated reality. So I think
But you wouldn't close the process off to people who don't have children or
No.
aren't in a mixed family.
No, I wouldn't.
And would the process be closed off to anybody?
Well, sure.
Who would it be closed off to?
I mean,
Someone who's committed a crime?
Right. I mean, I think what we always reserve in this is the right and the responsibility to do the vetting that is needed to make sure that anybody who is a violent, convicted criminal, they're in a different category.
What about nonviolent criminals? Citizenship open to them?
I think you take that case by case depending on what it is. I mean, but for sure, I mean, I think the easy place to start with is obviously, convicted violent criminals, no. But I think you start with the family as the point of origin and the people who are already in our community and about our community. And so to me, immigration is about having a comprehensive immigration reform now with a pathway to citizenship that is addressing arbitrary and artificial wait periods, both for visas, for the lottery system. It is arguably one of the most red tape driven systems we have, and you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who thinks the current immigration system works or that it's not broken.
If I could ask you a more philosophical question. So for all those folks in the 6th Congressional District who came to this country illegally, did they do something wrong?
That's an interesting question. I think people come to the United States because of the same reason our ancestors and our families did. They're looking for freedom, they're looking for economic opportunity. Some of them are escaping danger, some of them are looking for religious freedom, escaping religious persecution. I know from my family, there are reasons why we left Ireland when we came here. So the same principles that has made America and the United States a beacon of hope and opportunity, I'd like to think is still there. Was it wrong when people came over in the potato famine? Was it wrong when people came over during World War I or World War II? The reality is everybody assumes that their relatives were papered perfectly, but that's often not true. And so immigration has always been an extension of a human rights policy and part of the story of who we are. So the America I think we are has been one that is most represented by the Statue of Liberty, which is give me your tired, give me your huddled masses. And I want to think that we still are that beacon of opportunity for people who are looking for any kind of freedom you can think of, a chance for a better life for them and their families. Is that wrong? I don't think that's wrong. Mm-hmm. I think what we need to realize is we've made it harder for people to come to this country legally. We've made it more expensive and more time consuming. So if we still are the America I think we are, which is to have a space for people to go when this is what they're looking for and what we represent, then we need to recognize that our system is not well set up to make that happen.
Colorado Democrats chose Bernie Sanders. You chose Hillary Clinton in that same process. What did you see that they didn't see? Why was that the wrong choice?
Actually, I stayed out of the presidential primary.
And then you endorsed Clinton following.
Right. Like once the state had spoken and she was the candidate, of course, I've supported her at that point in time, but I wasn't engaged on the primary for what's there.
Would have supported Sanders if he had been the nominee.
Yeah, I would have. And I think what I liked about the discussion of that before we got to this point is I do think that there's a version of a healthy debate. And I think what Bernie Sanders brought to the equation is a very honest assessment of the fundamental question of, is our government working more for the wealthy, the largest corporations? Do we need Wall Street reform? He brings a strong populist willingness to challenge all the institutions that we know it. And I think that's healthy, because I think as we come forward, and I've watched as we've seen Sanders come in and support Hillary Clinton all the way through here, that income inequality, low wages, and the fact that the economy is still continuing, where we see the recovery, it is really at the very top ends of this, and we continue to see sort of sagging or plateauing economic reality for everybody else. This has now become part of a mainstream national conversation, and I think it is to Bernie's credit, in part, that this is now something that we're talking about as we're going through looking in November of who do we want to work for. How did our tax code get to be so skewed for the wealthy? How did it get to be so skewed for the most profitable corporations and at the expense of small businesses or at the middle class? So I think it was healthy to see new ideas and new issues brought in on that process, but they're definitely fully behind Hillary Clinton at this point.
Do you believe that there should be any restrictions at all on a woman's right to abortion?
I think that nobody has a right to tell a woman what to do with her body without her consent, ever.
So we're talking about, similar to Colorado law, abortion available as an option to a woman clear up to delivery.
I trust women because we are equal people with equal thoughts and with equal rights to have every bit the full total control over our bodies that you would expect or someone else would expect as a man. Having any third party override your autonomy or your right to decide what does or doesn't happen to your body, that decision never belongs to somebody else. And so we only single women out in this case. But the reality is the fundamental underlying principle is nobody, in my view, should ever be able to override what a woman says can and cannot happen to her own body.
Do Americans have an individual right to own guns?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about foreign policy briefly. Would you consider President Obama's Syria policy to be a failure at this point?
Well, I don't think we have Syria solved, and I don't think anyone can tell you we do. I think the reality we're seeing is that Assad has been brutal to his own people in his country. I think it's very clear that he's carrying out very serious, aggressive human rights violations with his own folks, and I think that it's pretty clear in my view that Russia is helping Assad oppress his own folks. I think the challenge that Obama faces, or that Clinton would face, or that Trump would face, or that anybody else would face is, do you make it better or worse with boots on the ground? There's no question that is an oppressive regime, and it is an absolute catastrophic human rights problem. And so nobody can look at you with a straight face and say that anybody has Syria resolved, because people are still, the Syrian people are still getting murdered in the droves. I think right now, the struggle is trying to figure out, okay, well, what's the best way to deal with this?
Mm-hmm. What about American troops?
Well, so, there's different ways you can use American troops, right, as we go into this. We need to recognize that Assad is not a friendly, but on the other hand, here's what we need to know on our own history. The experience of the United States going in, recognizing dictators, doing something overtly or covertly to take them out, leaving a power vacuum, and trying to do nation building also hasn't worked particularly well for us in the past. And so we get partway through the equation in this country often, and we're like, okay, we know this is a bad guy, so we're going to go take him out. And then the other half of the equation, and then what? Because the other problem we've seen.
So is that a no on American troops on the ground in Syria? It sounds like a no, but I didn't find a no in there.
Well, let me just finish this thought.
Sure.
Here's the rest of this thought. When we take out national actors, even bad ones, in whatever capacity, boots on the ground, special forces, if it's taking a side in a civil war, whatever we've actually done there before, it has left often a vacuum. And it's the very kind of vacuum that counterintuitively has often made it easier for groups like ISIS to get a foothold. So that's the second part of the thought, that we recognize that he's a brutal dictator oppressing his own people. The current situation is intolerable in a human rights crisis. A blunt instrument of just absolute nation building doesn't have a high probability of helping us out. And so this is one that I think we need to continue to be talking with multilateral conversations with people in the region. We need to be talking with folks that are on the ground and figuring out, like, what are the Syrian people wanting to do for the Syrian people? And I think that it has to include more options than just a question of troops on the ground, because even if we did do troops on the ground, there's no guarantee that that solves the dilemma or the human rights crisis in Syria, and there's no guarantee that that actually makes us safer.
How about a no-fly zone?
Yeah, I think we should be open to a no-fly zone.
Mm-hmm. Did it surprise you to hear President Obama suggest that that wasn't something that the American military could accomplish while simultaneously fighting ISIS, dealing with other challenges?
A little bit.
What do everyday Americans need to give up or compromise on if we are going to effectively fight climate change? You hear about the goals a lot. What you don't hear about is, hey, if we're going to do this, you need to be prepared to give up this, this, and this.
That's an interesting question. I think what ordinary Americans can do to help most on climate change is really take a look at energy consumption and energy conservation. A lot of what is driving it can be done in lifestyle choices, things that may not seem like a big deal, but going with more energy efficient appliances, choosing to carpool, considering mass transit. These are everyday things and so anytime you're asking anybody to think about a lifestyle change, I guess in some sense you're asking for a possible sacrifice, right? Water conservation.
Mm-hmm. Would we be better off if Americans paid more for energy so that Americans had to think more about how they use it?
Well, I don't think anyone's going to think that they're better off by hitting more in their pocketbook, but I do think that when we subsidize the fossil fuel industry, which we do heavily,
and renewables. We subsidize a lot of things.
But we have been subsidizing the fossil fuel industry for far, far longer, and that is embedded far deeper in our tax code. Mm-hmm. And I say that because one of the things we can do is stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, but if we want to see the true cost, it includes not only removing those subsidies, but it can also include the cost of things like Hurricane Katrina, and when we have droughts and wildfires and have record asthma rates and some of the health problems that come from something like this.
You're saying there's a connection between fossil fuel use, climate change, and the prevalence and intensity of hurricanes?
All of these extreme weather patterns we've been seeing are picking up in speed. That are absolutely part of the overall picture of climate change. And so if you talk to even insurance actuaries, which are kind of an interesting partner when you're thinking about a conversation with about what you do with climate change. But when people are predicting the number and frequency of severe weather attacks that are happening, they are relying on the same science that the rest of us are looking at to be like, this is going to increase in frequency, it's going to increase in intensity, and it's going to increase in cost. So I think what's interesting about the question you're asking is, doing nothing has a cost, doing something has a cost, and I think while I'd like to keep costs on energy as low as possible, I would like to at least be more transparent on all the energy choices so people can see both the financial cost of the energy choices that they're making, uncloaked with subsidies, unburied in some way, but truly see what the cost effects are, but also to be able to do
the same thing with renewables? Strip away the subsidies, lay it out bare so people know?
I think we should have full transparent disclosure.
Across all types of energy? Okay.
All of it.
Okay.
And then you can make the moral choice of hey, if you know, we've seen that solar and wind at this point is actually a cheaper bargain to buy than many of the traditional fossil fuels. So before we tell people for sure exactly where they're going to go, I do think we should have goals on getting to renewable energy, but information is the point. Okay. That if we're going to change behavior and ask people to do it, they need good information with which to do it.
I don't know how much more time you have. I have 5 more questions. So as long as we're not bumping up against the end of time. We close? Okay.
Sorry, I didn't know how many you had.
I wanted to give you I did not want to interrupt you as you were giving the answers. No, that's fine. So Nancy Pelosi says that it's possible that Democrats win back the House. She would be counting on you to win in order to make that math happen. Would you vote for her for Speaker?
I'd be proud to support Speaker Pelosi.
And there are ads running against you that are highly critical of your work as a trial attorney, which is a buzzword. You proud of that work as a trial attorney?
Yeah, my career has been basically helping individuals against big corporations and big government. So my track record has been pretty consistent, really, all the way through. I'm on the side of regular people against big corporations, big government. I'm proud of that. We have a system of power imbalance. And so if we don't want individuals and individual rights to get steamrolled, one of the noblest purposes I can see, whether it is in lawmaking or in individual capacity, is to actually advocate for people. And where you see a power imbalance, jump in on the side of the person whose rights and lives are about ready to get steamrolled. And so I've never shied away from taking on wealthy, powerful special interests before. In any career I've had before, it's made it easier for me to stand up to lobbyists at the Capitol. It's why I want to see lobbying reform at the federal level. And in Congress, I would continue the same thing, where I will always be on the side of individuals when it comes to a power imbalance between regular people and big corporations or big government.
Last question. The argument that Congressman Coffman's critics make is that he is too conservative for an evenly split district, about a third, a third, a third. By that same measure, wouldn't you be too liberal for the district?
I think that you need who's most responsive to the problems in the district. The labels on either side aren't helpful, and I say that because it doesn't give you higher wages, it doesn't put food on the table, it doesn't make college affordable. You can call those things whatever you want. But in 12 years of having walked and talked to thousands and thousands and thousands of people, they want a good paying job, they want their kids to get a good education, they want their kids to either have access to trade, vocational school, or affordable college. They want to be able to retire someday, and they want government and others to respect their personal freedoms and liberties. You can call that liberal, you can call it conservative, you can call it libertarian, but I've almost never had an actual voter or constituent, when you ask them what's important to you, what do you want to see Congress do for you? The first place they don't go is liberal or conservative. The first place they go is with their family. My problem with Mike Coffman is really about the fact that the problems that are most acute in our district, he has failed to take up and champion, and the votes he has cast have been out of step and out of touch with what would best advocate for people in the community. And conversely, in my own experience, because I have a strong populist track record, that means sometimes you're taking on the Democrats, sometimes you're taking on the Republicans, sometimes you're taking on your own governor. I've always been in a situation where I'm at odds with the majority of the lobby corps in the Capitol. You make enemies when you do that. The real problem with Congress right now, and with Mike Coffman in particular, is that they're not doing anything. They're not doing anything. So you ask people, how can we help you? How can we serve you? And go look at a Congress that is shutting down, that can't pass an annual budget, that has basically been missing in action on all the issues that people are asking us to deal with. Try, just try. You may not succeed, but the fact that we haven't seen a champion in there fighting, at least, on the issues that are important to people are the biggest problem. It's not the label of whether he's too conservative or, I don't think liberal conservative helps us here. You gotta start with the people in the district first. What are the issues they care about? Are you solving them? They really don't have time or patience for us to be talking about conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican. They want to know what you're going to do to help them and their family.
Morgan Carroll, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.